everyone. It's really nice to see a few familiar faces and to see a few familiar names, even though you don't want your video to be shown. I want to welcome our very first speaker of the season and also our very first virtual speaker of the season. And this has been nothing less than a challenging year. So this is our first hot topic event, and we're gonna just see how it goes. We've been practicing, we've all been on Zooms, so hopefully this will go smoothly. Bill White needs very little introduction, as he has been a yearly favorite at our hot topic events. However, let me fill you in on some of the interesting facts about Bill White since we have last seen him. He retired from the morning call in 2018 after a 44-year career, with the last 26 as a columnist and a blogger. His articles have always been informative, entertaining, and they've become quite legendary. And this is a good time to thank Bill for the support that he has given the League of Women Voters' biggest project of the last 4 years, Fair Districts, Pennsylvania. His articles have also always been supportive. They've been honest. They've been full of common sense and very fair. And hopefully a lot of people listen, especially our legislators. Hopefully they're still listening. Bill's a graduate of Lehigh University and has a master's degree in journalism from Ohio State University. And how fortunate for his alma mater that he is still teaching journalism at Lehigh. And indeed, those are some very lucky students. And no doubt you have enjoyed his bi-monthly columns for the morning call. It was a return we were all happy to see, especially this week. His example, his article on the interview of Donald Trump Jr. was very fair, a lot of common sense, and very humorous. And I have to tell you, Bill, I'm compiling my list of complaints, and I'm trying to keep them non-political, but that's really hard right now. So So let me tell you a little bit of his family. Bill and his wife, Jane, who has been a former editor of the Call of Well, they have 2 children, 2 grandchildren, 3 cats, and 1 dog. So sounds like undoubtedly he has had a very busy life. On behalf of the League, Bill, I want to welcome you and believe your chosen topic. You'll miss us when we're gone. We'll be very, very thoughtful and thought-provoking. The floor is yours, Bill.
Thanks, Mary. Appreciate it. Someone sent me a note shortly after I retired describing Alan Jennings as me as the Lehigh Valley's last 2 Old Testament prophets. I wasn't sure what I thought of that, although I'm pretty sure it was meant as a compliment. I've stopped shaving every day during the pandemic, but I figured I would need about 10 years of that to fit the image that conjures up in my mind. But I was flattered to be mentioned in the same breath with Alan, whom I greatly admire. But there's a big difference. He is a doer, an activist, and I know there are many more of you out there in the audience. I've always been the guy in the background who watches other people do wonderful and terrible things, tells readers their stories, and occasionally urges them to get involved. Here's one way to illustrate the distinction. I was lucky enough to be a chocolate cake judge at the State Farm Show a couple of years ago. 84 cakes, 6 judges. Do the math. I was lucky I made it back to my car. But in a way, that was a perfect illustration of the difference between someone like me and someone like Alan Jennings or some of the others on the front lines of social justice in the Lehigh Valley. I don't bake the cakes. I just tell people what I think of them when they're done and occasionally invite people to get into the kitchen. I am a natural worker. In fact, when I attended municipal and school board meetings, I treasured my anonymity. I'm inherently nondescript, which allowed me to sit in the audience and watch elected officials in their natural environment, unaware that a journalist was somewhere in the back of the room writing down what they were saying. That became more difficult as my face became more familiar to people through my Christmas light shows, pet videos, food judging, and repeated visits to some of those same meeting rooms, not to mention my photo in the paper 3 times a week. I was sitting at a Catasauqua school board meeting a few years ago, and I heard a woman behind me whispering, "That's Bill White. He's the one who eats his way through Music Fest." What a thing to be known for. But even if I became more visible, my role didn't change. I listened, I observed, I investigated, I explained, I coaxed. No baking. And as soon as I retired, I began hearing from people who wanted me to join things and do things. And I still haven't come to grips with that. I got a stark example of this on my first day of retirement. I was part of a panel on gerrymandering at a day-long conference in Harrisburg. I know a few of you are out there. And a couple of people in the audience got up and suggested I should run for state representative, or failing that, for township supervisor. So the moderator handed me the microphone, my reaction, and I offered a one-word answer: no. It got a good laugh, but I was serious. For 25 years, I knew what my calling was. Now I'm still trying to figure out a new one beyond babysitting for our grandsons, a little freelance writing, teaching, and working more for our church. What I can tell you is how lucky I was to be in a position for so many years to describe all the ways people were trying to make our communities better, and occasionally to encourage readers to help those efforts. The example that got a lot of attention was the way one of my columns prompted a reader to contribute $100,000 for the first 2 years toward the YMCA's effort to create a permanent winter warming station for the homeless. That in turn served as a catalyst for lots more community contributions and direct involvement in that effort. The warming station is off to a great start, mostly because so many people rose to that challenge. They even started serving meals this year, which is thanks to another generous contribution. The best thing I can say about my own role was that I was really persistent over the years in following the efforts to keep homeless people safe in the winter. And I did that by challenging the mayor and city council to recognize the desperation of the problem and finally do something about it instead of dithering, which I thought was what they were doing. By visiting St. Paul's Lutheran Church on a bitter cold winter night to talk to homeless people about the shelter the church was giving them in the basement and sleeping bags spread on the floor, and defending the church's efforts to get them off the streets at night, even in this very imperfect situation. By writing about the warming station that Everlasting Life Ministries ran in the Fountain Park Pool House and visiting people there and talking to them. By regularly updating efforts to find a permanent location, including the way plans for first St. Paul's and then the Y were collapsing. So yeah, I stuck with that and other topics I adopted as causes over the years, but I would attribute the inspiration for that generous contribution to a much more powerful force than my column. As the donor told me that day, God whispered in my ear. Still, my role in that speaks to the biggest reason why all of us should be concerned about the threats facing newspapers, large and small. We need them to tell us in much greater analytical detail than we can get from other forms of media what's happening in our communities, good and not so good. I could talk about momentous investigative stories the Morning Call has done, and they have had a tremendous impact on some of our communities. But I'd rather focus on the day-to-day coverage that helps to keep you informed about what people are doing and what needs to be done. No one can do that better. My position as a columnist gave me the luxury of picking and choosing the topics that interested me. And those included education, good government reforms, child sex abuse, medical marijuana, and many others. What will stay with me is all the people who dedicated themselves to solving those problems. I met businessman Al Douglas playing golf one day, and he convinced me to explore The Leader in Me, a program he was pushing to introduce to local elementary and middle schools. Through the tireless efforts of him and others, that movement began spreading, and I've seen firsthand the impact it's having in some of our schools. I got to see Fair Districts PA and other good government groups tackle gerrymandering, a topic I've been flogging unsuccessfully since 1991, believe it or not, and create the grassroots momentum that brought us to the brink of reform and helped spur our state Supreme Court to require more competitive congressional districts in our last congressional election. I got to meet parents whose children were struggling with seizure disorders and other conditions that they believe will be alleviated by medical marijuana, and to support their tireless lobbying efforts that finally won approval in Harrisburg. I got to tell the stories of many survivors of child sex abuse and explain the way our antiquated statute of limitation laws were shielding predators from responsibility for their crimes, and to support legislative efforts to give older victims a chance for justice. I got to know one survivor who launched what began as a 3-nation tour on what amounted to a scooter to raise awareness about child sexual abuse. And although he had to stop when an RV sideswiped him and broke his arm in California, the experience changed his life and helped a lot of other people too. Got to expose the mistreatment of dogs and other animals by unscrupulous kennel operators and others who financially benefited from inhumane practices. And along the way, I met so many people who've dedicated their lives to finding happy homes for dogs and cats who have been abandoned or mistreated. I got to tell stories of men who fought and in some cases died for our freedom in foreign wars. And so many other people have done extraordinary things right here at home with not nearly enough fanfare. I got to write about the women who conceived and organized Luminaria Night, which was a perfect match for my obsession with holiday decorating and with ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I loved writing about them and that wonderful community project which has raised an enormous amount of money for the work of New Bethany Ministries. I did so many Luminarian Night columns and blog posts that by the last few years, organizers are running out of new angles for me to write about. But every one of them gave me a new appreciation for the ways one good idea and lots of people who care about their community can make a difference. I was lucky enough to meet many of the people they helped, in part through my Christmas light tours. Some of the people who donated to Second Harvest Food Bank through my annual fundraising campaign asked that rather than take them on a tour, I take some people who wouldn't otherwise be able to get out to see the lights. Over the years, those included newly arrived refugees, kids in a variety of challenging circumstances, senior citizens, and groups of families living in New Bethany transitional housing. Most of those were in a donated limousine bus, but when that fell through my last year of fundraising, I just loaded them into my van. I love those trips. I remember one group of kids who went crazy when I took them to a musical display where they were playing selections from the Disney movie Frozen, which had just come out that year. When Let It Go started, they were also singing at the top of their lungs and laughing. As we made our way home on another one of those trips, the group launched into the 12 Days of Christmas. And thanks to one of the women who knew what my true love gave to me every single day, we made it all the way through the song, which never happens. My Christmas spirit was soaring. I wish people who are unduly judgmental about homelessness and poverty could have the opportunity I've had to see it up close and understand that any of us could find ourselves in similar circumstances, and that we all would hope for the same kind of generous hand up that New Bethany has been able to provide. I told people for years that I had the best job at the newspaper. And those nights with those families were just one example of what I loved about it. Day after day, I got to meet interesting people and to tell their stories. And I got to have fun with grammar, Christmas lights, food, people's love lives, bad writing, pet peeves, which I'm not now launching into again, and occasionally with elected officials who needed to be brought down a couple of pegs. I spent 26 years doing the job I wanted since I was a teenager. How many of us get to say that? And I'm getting to do it again twice a month, which is a workload I can handle as a mostly retired person. What I've learned along the way is that the Lehigh Valley is full of caring, generous people, including many who would find it a severe hardship to donate $100, let alone $100,000. Their small but steady contributions of $25 or more helped me raise about $218,000 for Second Harvest Food Bank through my Christmas light campaigns. Second Harvest gave me a humanitarian award a couple of years ago, but I wish we could have spread it around among all those people who supported what I was trying to do. When I explained a few winters ago that heavy demand as a result of local and national disasters had depleted the Mission Group Outreach Depot's supply of furniture for people in need, readers stepped up with so many contributions, the group was overwhelmed. Their warehouse ended up being overflowing. One of my favorite stories goes back more than 15 years. I wrote about a Bethlehem widow who had a wet basement full of mold that was beginning to spread upstairs, a child whose asthma was being exacerbated, and a debt to a waterproofing company that hadn't solved her problem. After I wrote about her, a retired engineer came forward at no cost to evaluate her situation and discovered the real problem was outside, where some inexpensive regrading went a long way toward keeping her basement dry. A local lawyer volunteered to represent her pro bono in small claims court, where she won some money back from that waterproofing company. And then another waterproofing company came in at no cost to remove all the mold, repair the affected areas, and do additional work that ended her problems with water and dampness forever. The widow surprised me with a plaque that said, "You're my hero." I still have it on my desk. But the real heroes were all these people who came forward to rescue her family. I just told her story. Over and over, I've watched people, businesses, and other organizations step up when they learned about a need. Spreading the word about what they've done and what needs to be done has been a wonderful privilege. That is what your local newspaper could do for your community. And even though we're a shadow of the organization I joined coming out of college, it's still doing it. One reason I cringe when people threaten to drop the paper because of customer service problems, claims of bias, and even because I was leaving or because I was returning. Actually, somebody just over the weekend threatened to drop their subscription because they didn't like my last column. Yes, we can and should be better, and every layoff, buyout, and ownership change makes that more difficult. We lost 10 journalists in the buyout I accepted, several more in a buyout the next year, many more in previous layoffs, and we couldn't afford any of those losses. Thanks to the near constant cost cutting by our overpaid and in many cases incompetent corporate leaders, our coverage and our customer service are nowhere near where they were before the outsourcing began. Maybe most shockingly, I learned while I was on vacation last month that Tribune was abandoning the building where it had been housed for 100 years. I was doing the same in New York, Orlando, and the homes of some other Tribune papers. Those of us who worked in our bureaus have already had a taste of that. I loved working on Main Street, Bethlehem, where I was for years. When the paper closed that office, we were devastated. We moved to Easton, which closed just not long afterward. And at that point, all other remaining bureau employees ended up with the mothership in Allentown. We knew efforts had been underway in recent years to move what was left of our Allentown operation to an office more suited to our shrunkenness, ideally in one of the new buildings downtown. But we never imagined the corporate bean counters would expect us to work permanently from home, which at this point, they may well be expecting. I sincerely hope that once the pandemic allows it, we'll move into a new newsroom somewhere. As I wrote in a column a few weeks ago, the synergy that comes from reporters and editors working from the same office, sharing ideas and contacts, and occasionally coming together to cover a big story as a group is invaluable. As a freelancer now, removed from the newsroom environment and the ideas reporters used to feed me and the discussions we used to have, I feel very disconnected. And I suspect it's the same, maybe to a lesser extent, for everyone on the staff. Whatever happens, I'm here to tell you that the employees aren't the only ones with a strong stake in seeing the Morning Call and other community newspapers like it survive. We, the people of these communities, need them if we're to stay informed about what's happening around us. For me, sometimes that involved writing words that I knew would make some people angry. But for a columnist, ducking subjects that matter just because they're contentious shouldn't be an option. In my journalism classes, I draw students' attention to a quote from a column from the former editor of the Express-Times, Frank Keegan. He wrote, "No other business would knowingly put out a product guaranteed to enrage some of its customers. But then a newspaper is not just another business. A newspaper is the only business with a public duty in addition to a bottom line." I look back at my columns from my last year, and I realized they had taken on a more strident, serious Old Testament prophet tone than they had in the past. I attribute that partly to the encroachment of just old age crotchetiness, but also maybe to statewide subjects that I thought warranted strong advocacy and lots of really disturbing national events and dialogue emanating from President Trump and others. I've learned that the blowback from writing about our president, gun control, Penn State football, and other sensitive subjects can result in a lot of nasty communications, which I've been reminded of over this past weekend. Lost readership, and even lost friendships. I had to work extra hard to patch things up last year with a longtime friend I almost lost over Donald Trump and fake news. Martin Luther King had words that ought to inspire not just newspaper columnists, but all of us. He said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." That said, I hate seeing the Morning Call lumped in with the national arguments about media bias, at Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, and the big national newspapers, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and so forth. They're very different animals. Whatever your political perspective, there are all kinds of ways of finding out what Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi are up to. When it comes to in-depth coverage of mayors, city and borough councils, local education, local police, and all kinds of other local topics, your local newspaper is all you have, and that coverage has nothing to do with national politics. One of my regrets is that because we did away with our editorial writing staff, at one point we had 3 editorial writers, and then went to just one local columnist, I became the only local opinion voice of the Morning Call for some years until Paul Mushik became a columnist in my last year. Now Paul is on his own. For all those years, I was just speaking for myself, which was all I ever was qualified to do. The danger was that my voice or Paul's might be perceived as the voice of the Morning Call and all the reporters who work there. And his job is to report what's happening, not to express their opinions about it. We had very different roles. The political orientation or the stupidity of my column shouldn't be considered a reflection on anybody but me. But I know it was used to make false assumptions about the journalistic integrity of a lot of reporters and editors who had absolutely no say in what I was writing, and in some cases disagreed with me. Their job is to tell you what's happening as honestly and completely as they can, and they continue to do that very well. So I suppose my message today as a retired prophet is twofold. First, I ask you to support your local journalists because I can assure you you'll miss them when they're gone. Timely, reliable information is vital to our communities and to our democracy. If you have lots of money, you might consider joining the effort to purchase the Morning Call and ensure its continued viability. That's an effort that the very newly formed Newspaper Guild and other people associated with the paper have been undertaking. Second, I thank everybody out there who contributed to my columns, many of which depended heavily on reader interaction. and more significantly, and those who continue to make the Lehigh Valley a better place to live, even if I never got the opportunity to tell your story. Maybe the biggest reason I was willing to accept the Morning Call's offer to come back and write twice a month was all those wonderful memories of the people I met and wrote about. The response I got when I retired, and again when I returned, was a perfect reflection of the kind of support I received from our readers for 25 plus years. You all were my biggest blessing, and for that, I thank you. Thanks.
Well, Bill, that was certainly very inspiring and somewhat disappointing that, we don't know what the future is going to hold. Perhaps when the Morning Call does find a smaller office, starts to cut the big cost of the big office building, hopefully there'll be that chance to bring a few journalists back, especially covering local news.
I would hope that would be the case, but the trend and the hedge funds who buy the newspapers, including, are basically gaining control of Tribune, who owns us. The trend is to just keep sucking as much money and profit as you can out of and newspapers are still profitable. I tell my students that, which they might not know to see what's happening, and to just keep cutting and cutting and cutting until there's nothing left, and then they just dump it.
Oh. Well, your words were very inspiring, and to hear your viewpoint of what being a journalist did for you was awfully impressive. It just gives you a new idea of what journalism can be all about. Connecting with people and connecting with your community, and you have certainly done that. At this time, I'm going to open it up to some questions. I see Molly has a question, so Terry, if you want to unmute Molly.
Yes, I'm unmuted. This is Molly Faust here. Bill, I noticed that there's a new initiative, Spotlight PA, group of reporters that are reporting on state news. Again, that's not local, but it is, getting news out to people in the state. Do you have any comment on that?
I was very happy to see it. I mean, I don't know a lot about it. I've been reading the stories, and it's great that there's that type of investigative work going on, because it's harder and harder. And, we still have someone in Harrisburg, but as we get cut thinner and thinner, the opportunity to do those types of investigative stories becomes more and more difficult. And so you have a group of people who are specifically dedicated to doing that is great. And they've done some really good work already, I know. There's a lot to write about out in Harrisburg, for sure. as you all in the league know well, and very frustrated. That's probably my biggest frustration writing over the years, was the things that I mentioned I started writing about gerrymandering in 1991. All the things that wrote about, throw the bums out, gerrymandering, statute of limitations for child sex, and that we never could push over the top to get the problem solved, just because of the politics are just so daunting, and so the more we can find out about the stuff that's happening behind the scenes with these folks, the better. So that Spotlight thing is great.
Bill, how many local journalists, are there any local journalists left with the Morning Call besides your bi-monthly? I mean, Paul is local, but are others like in the Harrisburg Bureau or whatever?
You mean writing columns?
Yeah.
No, it's, it was at one time it was Paul Carpenter and me. Then it was just me for a long time. Then it was Paul Mushik. They had him do it. And then when I left, it's just him. And they don't, so really they don't write opinion, there's no one else, right? And I mean, you don't want your reporters writing opinion columns, because that, I talked about that a little bit, that there's a lot of misunderstanding. That's one of the things I think TV confuses people, because they see all these reporters on the TV as pundits and expressing their opinions about things. And it really blurs those lines that I wish people understood better between the people expressing opinions and the people reporting the news. And they just assume, well, I'm this wild liberal, so everybody else at the paper is the same way, and they just sort of tar them all with the same brush.
So with the lack of numbers, it's almost impossible to cover what's happening in your local municipalities. That's
what's so scary about it. When I started at the paper, we sent people out to all these municipal school board meetings everywhere. I mean, I covered zoning hearing boards, planning commissions, even some of the smaller, and some of the smaller committees. I got lost once when they sent me up to, what was I supposed to be covering? I forget, it was something up in Emerald. I couldn't find my way up in Emerald, up near Slatington. I got lost. I never made it to the meeting. But the tiniest stuff we used to go up and cover. And we had to keep pulling back and pulling back. We have one reporter now who covers our road warrior, who used to cover the Northampton County Council, Northampton County, now covers Northampton County, Lehigh County. He's the road warrior, covers transportation. We have people who are assigned broad swaths of the area of suburban communities and never can get to the things. One thing I liked as a columnist was occasionally just showing up at a place like Slatington and at their meetings. And I always got plenty of good material out of Slatington. But no reporters were ever there. There was somebody from the Hayton Times News would go up there, and she would be there all the time. And I talked to her, but the Morning Call hadn't set foot in that place forever. And unfortunately, the first time I was able to sneak in there and they didn't know me. And then the next time the mayor came up and shook my hand and said hello. So I was out and I couldn't hide back there anymore to make fun of them. But we needed, I had thought about having that project of just going around to all these different communities and just showing up, because there's so much value just in having somebody from the media sitting in a seat in the audience, letting them know somebody's paying attention to what you're doing. If nobody's paying attention, invariably some people are going to do things they shouldn't do. And that's what really scared me. I mean, we cover Allentown and Bethlehem, Easton, but we just, the rest of the area is just very much hit and miss at this point, and that's scary.
Yeah. I do remember, we do have another question from Molly.
All right. Yeah, this one is not a question, Bill. Early in my, I guess I'm wondering what young journalists you do teaching and what you're teaching them now. And the reason for that is early in my life, I was a stringer down in South Jersey, and I knew nothing about government. And I attended one of those township meetings, and I had to write an article on it, and I had no idea what was going on. I guess I met with the attorney afterwards, who was for the township, trying to get some idea of what to write about and what had happened. So I assume, journalists get trained in, in government. I didn't belong to the League of Women Voters then. Yeah.
Well, I used to encourage some of the students to take government as a minor. I thought would be helpful to them to understand what was going on. The fact is, not too many of them are going into newspapers anymore.
Right.
The one kid who is the editor of the Brown and White and was one of my best students I've had. Is tremendous. And he went out to Harrisburg actually, and something, he might've been working on some spotlight stuff there and is back. And they're doing the Brown and White, the student paper is terrific. And he's digging and doing all the stuff that we had fun doing when I was in college. I mean, I was on the staff with Marty Barron, who was the editor of the Washington Post, was 2 years younger than I was and worked under me when I was editor of the Brown and White. They're doing really good stuff there. But most of them, I can't in good conscience encourage people to go into the newspaper business, but I'm still teaching kind of the same basics of, my course is the introductory journalism course and media course, I guess they call it now. So I'm still teaching them basics of writing a lead, writing a good, strong news story, keeping their opinions out of their stories. We get to feature writing. They start their own blogs and do some of that. But one of our lectures was, we coming up another week or so, is meeting coverage. How do you cover municipal meetings? And one of the things I tell them is you need to go up and ask as many questions as you have to ask until you understand what's happened, just like you did. Keep asking questions until you know what's going on, because you have to be able to get this to, if you're just thrown in blind to these meetings, you have no idea what's happening. So what can you do? You do what research you can, but and that's one of the hard things. I was very shy, and a lot of them are the same way, and going up and starting to grill people with questions, and it's hard, but I tell them people will appreciate it. You're taking the time to make sure you get the story right. So it is an issue. And for those who go in the newspaper business, have a lot of the same, it's kind of the same experience for them, but there are fewer of them out there to do it. So it's even more challenging. They go into a lot of other types of stuff, but a lot of the basics of this writing apply for public relations, or if you're writing online, so a lot of them go work on, in media online and that kind of thing. So the basics translate pretty well to wherever you end up.
I do remember reading a really good article in the Brown and White about voter registration program at Lehigh. That was very informative, very eye-opening.
Yeah, no, they do. And they're pretty activist. I mean, they're pushing stuff, and that's a big issue now anyway. I have a class on that Tuesday afternoon, election day. One of the big pushes now is should there be classes at Lehigh on Tuesday? Now, I was going to have conferences actually with the students on Zoom, which is everything is Zoom now, which would be like 15-minute intervals. But I pretty much decided that I'm just going to cancel that, and I'll move things around so that they have the whole day free to make sure they get out and vote.
I see another question from my better half, Bill Erdman.
Bill, I have an interesting question. You've been around politicians and politics your entire career, and setting aside the contents of it, I've heard a number of people comment that they could not believe the president agreed to sit down for 18 hours of interview at this point. Nonpartisan, what are your thoughts on that underlying decision to agree to do that? It just seems like, regardless of what came out of it, everybody seems to think it was probably not a good decision.
No, I would say not. But I think he has an inflated idea of his ability to charm and to bring somebody over to his side. I heard Woodward this morning actually on being interviewed on someplace, and he said, and they asked him that question, and he said, well, his last book, Trump really regretted that he had refused to talk to him, and so he felt that resulted in the book being more negative to him than it would have been otherwise. So he decided that the way to solve that was to make himself available to Woodward, and he would win him over. And he was trying to impress him with sharing stuff about our nuclear secrets and stuff. I mean, it was crazy, some of the stuff on these things that he was sharing, sensitive national security stuff along with everything else. But, trying to impress him and to bring him over to his side. And clearly he didn't quite pull it off, but but it's very interesting. It's crazy. He has all this stuff on tape, and it seems very damning. But to Trump, I don't think his perception of what he does and what's going on in the country is so different than what ours is, that I don't know if he really understands that he screwed up.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? You know how to use the raise hand? I don't see any. Anyone who
Right.
No?
Okay, well then, if not, then I think we'll, wind things up. Bill, thank you. Thank you for talking with us. We found it informative and always appreciate having you come to talk to us.
Oh, thanks.
I want to remind you about the Hot Topics Luncheon next month, which is Monday, October 12th, Columbus Day, and Mary Erdman is speaking on Fair Districts, PA. I want to let you know that we have an Instagram account set up. If you've been reading our newsletter, you would see that there. We have had several requests for candidates forums, but no arrangements have been made, and we will have to figure out how to do it on Zoom. I have some concerns about that. And the other thing is to let you know is the voter's guide will be in the morning call October 1st. The morning call has been very good about, through the years, supporting us with printing the guide and printing some extras for us to distribute. So thank you all. I guess this ends our meeting, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Thanks again, Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
So on.
Okay. Thanks a lot for doing this for us. That was very interesting. Looking forward to the future.
Okay. Well, we'll see. All right. So on.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.